Hello and welcome to the ArsenalVision post-match podcast with me, your host, Tim Stillman, because Elliot, since we've gone out of the Europa League, he does not work Thursdays anymore. He has made that very, very clear. So I'm stepping into the hosting chair for the second consecutive Thursday before I introduce our guests, which I will do presently. Well, our guests, they're not really guests, are they? Our panelists, as it were, making this sound a little bit like question time. But before I do that, just a couple of other bits of content over on our Patreon for patrons. If you aren't already a member and fancy becoming a member, we do a lot on the Patreon side, I think it's fair to say. There's a good West Ham rewatch with Elliot and Clive, kind of going through some of the things we did quite well in that game. I think it's fair to say that when you win 6-0 away from home, you've probably done some things well, and perhaps we'll pull on a few of those threads in this episode as well. And yesterday, Clive and myself got together to do our One Club episode about Arsenal women, kind of a bit of an updater about what's been happening there in the last month. And it's kind of we try to make them relatively entry level. If you're women's team curious, but I think you still get something out of them if you're a regular watcher of the women's team. So that is also over on the Patreon, and we do those roughly monthly. Get over on our Patreon, and obviously we also have other stuff, scouting pods and instant reactions to games as well, which we also now live stream. So plenty of stuff to get your teeth into. However, enough of the sales pitch. Let me present our panelists. Paul, who you can follow on Twitter at PoznanInMyPants. Hello, Paul.
Woohoo!
And Clive, who you can follow on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Good afternoon, Clive.
Hello.
Clive, I'm going to start with you just because, and I'm going to give you both a bit of a crack at this, actually, because, listen, when Arsenal are playing well, sometimes it's difficult to put these podcasts together in terms of having a running order, because Arsenal playing well actually doesn't create that many talking points, which is really, really nice. And we talked, I think, on the last pod about that kind of aspiration that Arsenal kind of, in a public sense, fade into the background, just start winning games by a few goals so no one notices, no one talks about us, and we're last on match of the day. But one of the things, Clive, that you and Elliot really looked at in the West Ham game, and something I think that has been a bit of a response to maybe some of the troubles Arsenal were having with teams doubling up on the wide players and deep blocks and things like that. I think it was James Benge that referred to it as like having 3 number 10s kind of model. So having a little bit more movement between like the left 8, the false 9, the 10, and all of that. And when you look at the average position charts of the West Ham game, like Trossard, Havertz, Odegaard, kind of all look like number 10s, but it's actually kind of a big amorphous blob, really. And it looks to me like this is a bit of a response, and maybe something that Arsenal have worked on potentially when they're in Dubai. Do you want to maybe set that out in better terms than I've done? And I guess your impression of how much this is a response to an issue, how much there was just a bit of variance involved. Maybe we were just very unlucky to score so few goals just before the winter. I guess essentially what's happened is Arsenal have been presented with a problem, and at least for now, it looks like Mikel Arteta's kind of solved it.
Yeah, I think it's been a journey since the Liverpool Cup game, if I'm honest with you. I think we've been a little bit more aggressive where we need to be, I think, and a little bit more variation of running and movement. I always come back to, I said before, so sorry for repeating myself, but the time when I thought we're thinking about how we're attacking was when I saw that Reece Nelson run out to in from Aaron Ramsdale kick in the FA Cup game. It just hit me like a bullet. I thought, I've not seen that before for ages. So we're now the handbrake's off, shall we say. We're now moving, rotating. And I thought, oh, this is good. So obviously energy in that game was great, but we were a little bit tentative on our last thing that we did, ended up heading in our own net and lost 2-0. So we didn't see what we did because we lost the game. You know, and I kept saying that I found January a difficult month to podcast because I felt we couldn't see the team, we couldn't see the evolution because the results weren't going so well, and we had lots of time to think. When we have time to think, as Arsenal fans, we start to think about stuff that's going wrong. So we start thinking about the atmosphere, the youth development, we talk about all these other things, the ticketing and everything that's not quite perfect, we go into that. But I think from a tactical point of view, I'm not at a point of conclusion yet. I'm at the point of we are showing a lot more variation in what we do. Right. So, and the personnel has been different and played in different positions, but the principles of play are really, really key. And if you're trying to put it down to one word, I'd say rotation is coming, and it really showed up in the West Ham game massively. Rotations, different rotations, an increased number of rotations, not just within the pods, but moving from side to side. Odegaard coming to the left side, overloading that side. Trossard coming to the right side, and me and Elliot did a rewatch of the game, and I honestly, if you watch the first half again and just watch the first half through Trossard, you will be shocked. You will be shocked. He was underrated man of the match in that game. He broke that game open. That all made us think, we won this game 6-0. After 20 minutes, you could not see it coming. Then Trossard started to dance and move, and they were broken. He had 2 chances. They were done. And he just broke the game open and created overloads and created partnerships. And once you do that, then you lean into our talent. So I love what we've done with the players that we have. I'm not at conclusion yet because we've had various different personnel in different positions. Havertz, for example, playing deep and high, rotating. Odegaard playing low and high.
Is that the Scooby-Doo pronunciation of Odegaard?
Odegaard playing. Some people say he's too deep. The next meet is high, but it's rotation. So if you want to summarize, it's rotation, isn't it? It's rotation. Ben White, interior, exterior. It's rotation, and that's been the watchword for me in the last 2-3 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and we're going to come on to Trossard in a bit more depth in a minute because we'll really turn attentions to the Burnley game and what the lineup might look like. But Paul, I'm an anxious person. I don't mind saying this, and I always say that like anxiety, it's a bit like having 2 brains or 2 competing voices in your head. You've got your logical brain that kind of says things are probably going to be all right, but then you've got that other voice in your head that goes, no, everything's going to be terrible, and it's a case of which one you tune out. And so I'm thinking a lot about how over the last year, 18 months, there seems to be, and it might be I'm zooming in too much, but there seems to be this pattern of like Arsenal do something and it's amazing, and then the opponent adapts, and then it like hits the brakes a bit, but then Arteta and his staff sit there and like brains trust and sort it all out, and then it looks great again. And it feels like this constant kind of, I don't know if tension is the right word, but process of like modification, opponents modify, we modify. And on one hand, I'm thinking that means we've got a brilliant coach who gets presented a problem and knows how to solve it. But my anxious brain is kind of saying, how sustainable is that? How many solutions can you come up with? It reminds me a bit, this might be a tortured analogy of that thing that people say about the Conservative government in the UK, about how it's all very well selling off public assets until you run out of public assets to sell off. So where do you stand on this kind of, the modifications we're seeing now in response to an issue I think we clearly had? And, how are you seeing that timeline?
Well, I'm with you. I think torture the Conservative government. No, on the football thing. So you have made this point, I think, on numerous occasions, and I think it's logically absolutely correct that we have a way of playing and teams adapt to it. But I also struggle with it because if I look at last season, we had a very, very, very probably the clearest defined way of playing, almost a defined 11. Everybody kind of knew what was coming, and it worked, and it kept working, and it only stopped working, I think, when we ran out of players who could. And so, if you're good enough, it's like, do we change because the delta between our performances and how other people are reacting is still narrower? Like, if you're really good and you can execute and you're getting the goals from it and they're getting better, but it's still a pretty reliable way to go, it's kind of a don't fix what ain't broke. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, Tim. And so other teams do adapt to you and make it harder. but that also means they play into your way of playing. I mean, but obviously variations within that. What you really want is a way you know how to play, that everybody in your team knows how to play, and then the variations you can come up, tweaks within game. It's almost like subroutines within a game that you have more options, etc. And one thing I would have said about Arteta was when he was missing a key player in the past, I wasn't convinced he was able to adapt the system or the way of playing to come out with a different lineup that got the result, got the impact. And it seems like in part because now he all the players are his, and he's looked for particularly flexible players, and the players are better. Like when you've set players out, but you can call on Trossard and Havertz into your mix. They're your not quite filler players, but like they're the guys who fill the gaps, even if Havertz may or may not have started in this particular game. Those are very Arteta positional play footballers who you could pop into different kind of looks and ways of playing. And like when you have to look to Ben White to step into midfield, guess what? He's probably a really good footballer who can step into midfield a bit more. And so now when he asks to solve problems from his players, he's got players who can do different things. And so I think he's come up. I think he's probably learned a lot in the choices you make or don't make, the things you ask of players to do and you don't ask them to do. And he probably knew Kieran Tierney wasn't very good at being Zinchenko, but he was still at the point where he was teaching his team, this is how we play. So even if the guy isn't quite, I'm not going to change to, there was a lot of criticism of Arteta. He should play a system that suits his players. And he said, no, actually, I'm going to play our blueprint of how we play, and you guys will, to the best you can, adapt to it because we're not compromising. I'm not confusing the message. This club is going to, up and down the club, whether you're in the academy, whether you're whether we're playing in there's never going to be time we don't know how we play. To Clive's point, the principles of play, and I think it was more than principles of play. It was also, until you're really, really good, you can't just rely on principles of play. He had a very fixed way of playing, both in the early days when we play kind of built up from the back and we weren't quite good enough in attack, and now when we kind of have all the pieces working.
I think oh, sorry, I've got a bit of feedback there. I think principles of play is a really good phrase. And Clive, I know people love when I do this, but speaking to Jonas Eidevall over the last couple of years, one of the phrases he uses a lot is he says, like, the aspiration for any coach is that your opponents feel like this is the first time they've played against a team like this, but for your players to feel like they do it all the time, that's the kind of the promised land to get to as a coach. What's your thinking along these lines?
So when I was out on my walk just now, for those on YouTube, you can see that I'm on my walk. I've literally just got back. I listened to 2 or 3 podcasts, right? I listened to Tim's women's one for Andrew today around Manchester United the weekend. The one we did yesterday, Tim, a little bit of that. I listened to a Formula One podcast around the new cars coming in. And there was a discussion around Mercedes and how they're building their car. And it looks quite steady and traditional. And it got me thinking about how you build a team. And people are going to laugh. What are you talking about? Well, they've put their car in place so it allows for development. They have their base car, it allows for development. So to do that, you need to have players that are, in a football context, that are multi-dimensional. We were talking about rotation in the first answer. A player like Kai Havertz is a perfect Arteta player. A player like Trossard is a perfect Arteta player because they give you many dimensions without changing your team. They give you many dimensions in the same game. If you're spending the club's money, the one thing you need to manage in the modern game is evolution. Evolution within game, not just within over a year. And the evolution in how you play. And that just may be a tweak or a group of players in one area, but you must have a certain skill set which allows you to evolve. I don't mean to criticize the players of yesteryear, but their weaknesses were so weak we were forced to play a certain way. Maybe let's talk about line height, for example, without mentioning any names. You know, we weren't able to defend our box as well because our fullbacks may not have been quite as robust in certain spaces in the air. So they have deficiencies which force you into a game plan that you may not want to do. You know, Arteta's first team, back five, left wing back was a bodyguard for our left wing striker who couldn't play centre forward really how he wanted to play. Stuck him on left wing, gave him Ainsley, gave him Saka as a bodyguard, and said, "Look after him, will you?" And so he doesn't have to come back, and he goes and wins us the cup. He was forced to do certain things because we didn't have the dimensions, we didn't have the players that could evolve our system within game. Now he's building that Formula One car, he's developing it, and he has to, because you said, Tim, people are watching. I have to say, I think we're a bit biased, but I think we're the most tactically interesting team in the league by the way we play. That's not just in-game, that's from restarts as well. We're the set-piece geniuses at the moment, and everything we do from the goalkeeper's hands, it's so interesting. It's been looked at, it's been stopped, it's being copied. And that throw we used to do to the byline, right to the corner flag until we get a cut back. The second game, Liverpool stopped that. They stopped that throw. So we change it. We go again. We go another throw. And we're going to have to consistently do this to stay ahead of our competition.
Yeah, and, we'll talk a bit more in depth about Burnley, but I'm thinking simple brain on Burnley, not good at defending set pieces. Every single team I watch play Burnley put the ball under the crossbar when they have a corner, and we did that against them at the Emirates. But we'll come on to that. We'll stick a bit of a pin in that, and Paul brought up the left-back position, which I want to talk about later, so we'll stick a bit of a pin in that. But Paul, I kind of want to stay on this like amorphous blob that we've been kind of cultivating up front a little bit between Trossard and Havertz, and personally all season I've been looking for that. And I've been missing that because at the beginning of the season, I was thinking, yeah, like those two, surely they can interchange quite a lot. And I didn't feel like we'd seen it until recently. But now we've got this kind of 3 number 10s, and that pulls defenders out. So our wide players no longer have 17 players each on them. But I wanted to ask you, because I know you've always despised Eddie Nketiah, wanted him out of the club. You've been a fierce critic of Eddie Nketiah for a long, long time. And so I wanted to ask you, like, where does this leave him? Because we're talking about multi-dimensional players here. I'm not sure that's what Eddie is at the moment. And where are you on, look, Elliot's not here, so let's have the Nketiah discussion, and I'll bring that up in his
But he's
place.
listening, and he'll use
exactly. Do you think this has like long-term ramifications for him, or do you view it as, well, in 2 months' time, we're probably going to have to do another modification in attack once everyone works out what we're doing, and that might well feature Eddie more prominently as it did at the beginning of the season?
So like the amorphous blob, I think is more amorphous multi-blob, in that we keep taking up shape. It's a dynamic changing thing, but there are different shapes you see all the time. That's the first thing I gotta take you down on, Tim. The Eddie question is really interesting. Like, I think we feel we've seen, at least for now and within kind of a reasonable range of certainty, we kind of seen his level within this kind of a team. I've never thought he was the perfect player. Like, even when he was doing good, this isn't revisionism. Even when he was doing good, or he'd have a good run of games, I never thought he was the perfect Arteta player as a striker. I mean, we all would see him more as where if he has a superpower, and maybe that's a little strong, a very good power, it's in the box, right? And it's his fox in the boxness. That's not really how we play, and it's not really the looks he gets, and it's not the main thing we've asked him to do. We've asked him to be a false 9 when he's really mostly a 9. And he works pretty hard, and he does fairly well, but there are limits to it. And I think he's very much a case of, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. He was in the club. He's a good guy. people get weirded out that he gets well paid. I think the problem is everybody in the squad gets well paid, and he could have got a very good fee if he moved elsewhere. And I think we still can get a good fee for him when he moves elsewhere. And I think he will move elsewhere. I think we will move. Like, I always check myself with when I have a tendency to want to defend a player. Is this a player that I see in our lineup when say we make the Champions League semi-finals 2 years in a row? Is that one of the players you're totally fine with starting and it doesn't give you any concerns? And like, we have a few of those. I would say to myself, I'm not sure I want him playing for us in the Champions League semi-finals, right? There's it's a handful of players you have no questions about. A handful of players after that you're pretty happy with. There's a handful of players you like. Well, I hope we've upgraded that guy by then. So Eddie does fairly well, but like, you see if you want to call it the 310s, the three Sopranos, out there doing their thing, and you look at the touch map for Trossard and Havertz, it's insane. They are everywhere in this game. Odegaard's pretty much everywhere compared to normal times. And the three of those just basically started to fill in for each other. I mean, it was Trossard who dropped deep and popped the ball over the top. Hang on a second. He's our false nine. And as I said a couple of times, I was busy with a couple of things while the game started. I thought I was watching the game, but I had a couple of things going on. And after 10 minutes, like, I've no clue. I wish I'd paid attention to the kickoff. I don't know where anybody's supposed to be standing between Odegaard, Trossard, and Havertz. I think this is a really interesting game, the West Ham one, for saying Arteta solved a problem in a different way, maybe not a new way, but a different way, in that for the first 10 minutes, we played out from the back very, very deliberately, and they pressed really hard. I mean, if they gave up the ghost at some point, it certainly wasn't in the first 10 to 20 minutes. I'm like, God, they're really pressing us. You know, they got on to Rice as he was bringing the ball out of the box. They were getting on to players, giving us a hard time, and like, we played into it. Our Raya played into it, playing out from the back, taking on risky angles for short passes. And then we started to turn the crank up, going up through the gears. And guess what? When you got up to the front three, our three Sopranos, every time they received the ball, they'd be in space. And so the conversation of, had people worked this out, we didn't have the problem of our triangles on the edges, trying to find ways through and then trying to get the ball to a striker who would be Eddie, because the three Sopranos gave us way more space and allowed us to play out from the back. I think those things go together in a way that a more conventional striker, more of a reference striker, like, you don't get the two. We'll have the striker conversation, but I'd almost argue you can't have a proper striker and get that kind of performance. It's one or the other. So when you're saying, I want better finishing, is that really our problem? I mean, there'll be a game or two where you say, yes, finishing's our problem, but we're with our XG, right? It's not like we're not hitting our XG. We just need more XG, and this way of playing gives you more XG.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that question that actually came into the Arsecast during Christmas that I know, Clive, you mentioned about we're focusing on goals, but should we focus on assists? So it's almost more like the final pass than the final action. And we'll come to Odegaard in a minute, because I kind of want to stay with you on Trossard and Burnley on Saturday. At time of recording, we haven't had Mikel Arteta's press conference, so we don't know whether Gabriel Jesus is fit. And obviously, we're in a big week now. Champions League is back, so we've got big game in Porto next week, which I believe you're going to be at, and then Newcastle after that. So, like, we're back into the get three big games in a week kind of mode. Would you keep Trossard up front? Let's say Gabriel Jesus is fit. Would you keep Trossard up front against Burnley?
Yeah, I find it difficult to sort of change this team. But again, without knowing information, etc., there is, if you notice, Man City last weekend, they made a number of changes for their home game, and then when it came to a Champions League game of the week, they had all the top boys out. That's basically their Champions League final team. So I wonder what Arsenal will try to do. I still think I don't feel quite as confident about changing the team yet. You just want to get the win. I prefer to go get the points and do it at the weekend and get people out of there. But they'll know who's in the red zone, shall we say. I like Trossard. I've got to be honest with you. I like what he does. And if you look back to when he first joined and we played him in a position that we weren't sure about, and he reopened up our goal scoring, and he was really strong on the assists. And he was really quite good. Sorry, what's happening there? Sorry about that. Some other advert just popped up. So basically, he was it was a Formula 1 advert, funny enough. and so basically, he has a way of unlocking other people. And I said on the podcast last week, there needs to be a conversation about him because his output, or the output of our team when he plays, I'm sure there must be some data around it. It goes up significantly, and we all have this team in our head. And are we missing? Are we missing the real guy that's opening up this team? Are we missing it? I wonder if I'm missing it. I don't pick him in our strongest team, but I think I might be missing something here because performance last week was outstanding, and he made so many other players better, and created so many openings. So, and I thought the manager recognised he took him off after 67 minutes, and a bigger smile on his face ever. That says to me, we're looking after you. Because you've just put a layer into his team that other people are not. I do think some of it is outcome related because if Gabriel Jesus drops deep and plays the ball at the edge of his area, we'll go crazy if we draw the game. But if we win the game, we feel what a player he is. Look at his work rate. Look how many touches he has, etc., etc. So,
but even the Forest game where he gets a goal and an assist and the man of the match didn't stop that conversation.
No, he didn't. It's a conversation to have, and I do think the conversation around what type of forward suits Arsenal is the conversation that's going to keep me walking, shall we say. It's really going to keep me thinking and keep me awake, and I'm not there yet. I'm not there. I'm not there. What we should go for, what our direction should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at even City bringing someone like Haaland in, like completely changed the way they played, really. And it took them a few months, but I think Haaland is that level of player, a bit like when Fabregas came through for us, right? And it's like, we've got to make the team work for this player because they're so good. And speaking of creative players, Paul, that are very good, I mean, I think we've had a good discussion here about Trossard, and maybe that's a player we found again in the last couple of weeks, and probably quite a good player to try to find if you're suffering with deep blocks. But I mean, a player I think we always knew that we had, but we really seem to have got him back to, shall we say, last season's standards, is Martin Odegaard. And I feel like on these pods we've skirted over a bit because there's always so much to talk about how well he's been playing. Maybe that's just because he's so good we kind of expect it and it feels unremarkable. But his role has changed a little bit as well. We've seen him dropping deep a bit more. And then at West Ham on Saturday, I mean, we're talking about those 3 number 10s. I couldn't tell you where Odegaard was really playing, because one minute he was collecting the ball off the centre halves and the next minute he's on the edge of the area, setting up Saka. And I think the way he, shall we say, treated Ethan Nwaneri when he came on as well, just a free swim pool to talk about how Martin Odegaard's very good at football, and maybe how he's come back towards, I think, some of the form that had us talking about potential like PFA Player of the Year last season.
Yeah, look, I'm going to take a controversial position here and say that Martin Odegaard is very good at football.
That's the kind of controversy and insight that you listen to this podcast for.
And insight, yep. Look, there's no getting away from the fact that Dubai seemed to be a really good thing for these guys. I don't know what we have planned for the next interlull, but I would suggest bring everybody to Dubai.
Back to Salt BAE's steakhouse.
Yep. Never change a winning formula. Back to having the the social media's kickoff over poor Mikel Arteta taking his kids out for a fun evening. But hey, it works. So until the opposition figures that out, we keep doing it. Odegaard, look, I think, apart from the fact that, yes, look, the guys are all perkier, we often measure players by the games where they're struggling to get something done because they got 3 or 4 guys on them or in their area. Okay, you don't put 4 guys on our Odegaard and Saka, but actually, if you crowd that particular area of the pitch, then you got 4 or 5 guys milling around, blocking the area that Saka and Odegaard play into, keeping them on the edges. And then we talk about the triangles and how effective were they. Sorry, my doggy there. And it leads back to the Three Sopranos conversation, and he was one of those. I think it was most pronounced right at the start of the game that Odegaard was dropping into places so deep that you don't really anticipate. And I think it was very much the plan. Look, we're not going to attack and press up front. They want to sit in with the best part of like 10 players in the box and frustrate and crowd us out. And we're not going to do that. We're just going to pull the ball back deep, play around that end, have space when we move up through the pitch. And Odegaard was the most visible player to drop deep in that scenario. It was very Bernardo Silva. And now Bernardo Silva will wander all over the pitch. And I think mostly Odegaard, if you track his flights, he tends to pick still fairly constant parts of the pitch he plays in, more so than you expect from a 10. He really has areas of the pitch he likes. It's a question of whether he drops super deep, kind of as a pivot, a second pivot temporarily. And in this game, I'm like at the start, I'm thinking, oh, he's the right pivot. He's playing instead of Jorginho. It's Rice to his left, Jorginho to the right. That's what they had convinced me of in the first 10 minutes. He's a fantastic player. His work effort, his professionalism just beams out of him. Absolute top-class professional. Handles himself brilliantly, always pushing, always leading, never is giving you less than 100%. And I think when we question him or Saka or Martinelli's form, I really feel the three of them are actually super consistent. It's more a function of how is the team giving them space and looks and options, and is there movement around them, or are they stuck trying to do triangles off to the right? And are we saying, oh, his form's dropped off a little bit? I think you can include, oh, look, Saka's playing really well at the moment. Oh, look, Odegaard's playing really well at the moment. Well, that's because we are creating, if we've got Martinelli on the left and Saka on the right with Odegaard, they're going to put players out there and you got to hurt them through the middle. And we haven't been doing that enough. And it's partly the movement we're talking about in kind of the earlier sections of this. I think it's all about that ability to stir the pot, not having the fixed reference points.
Yeah, absolutely. And Clive, I want to give you a go on that as well. I think there are things about Odegaard that really jump out at you, particularly in the stadium. One of them is his work rate, like leading that press, and also as an orchestrator of the crowd. He's very in touch with the crowd as well as the bench. But we're talking, and also, sorry, the other thing is his touch. Like, there are times where you gasp because of the way he can kill a ball on the left foot out of the air, any angle, and just bring it into his stride. Like, he has the best touch of any player at Arsenal, but by quite a distance. And there are some guys with good feet in there. But for you, Clive, we're talking about kind of multifunctional, multi-dimensional players. I wonder whether we don't give Odegaard, not that we don't give Odegaard the credit. I think it's sometimes this just happens with really good players. You skate over them, right? But this is a multi-dimensional player, right? Like, he's not just in one part of the pitch doing one thing.
Yeah, he is someone you can build on and build around because he can do so many things. And number one thing, he can look after that football. and he can see parts of the pitch that we can't see from our bird's eye view in the seats. He can see it on ground level, and his pass appreciation, the way he receives it is it makes people step away because they don't want to get embarrassed. So, and I will say I can actually one up you on this one, Tim. So I've actually met him, and when I spoke to him in that interview that I did, we spoke about captaincy, and I was struck by his answer. He sort of said, "I want to do it my way," and that really stuck with me. I thought, that's interesting. And sometimes in all our lives, in our work lives, for example, we're in an environment where we can be ourselves. And they're probably your more successful environments where you can be yourself, do things your way, and it's appreciated. And I think I took that from him without him telling me. I took that from him that he's able to do things his way. His base principle suits the manager's principles. In fact, the manager thinks he's an example. That's why he's made him the leader. If you think about our previous captain turning up in his gold Lamborghini Urus, that's maybe not quite the example that was needed to be set for a youngest squad in the league. And these are just simple little differences in people's approach. And I think his approach suits the environment that we want to create. And so that really stood with me. And so, yeah, his leadership on the pitch from a technical point of view is obvious. And when he's not doing it, the other guy, Jorginho, is the one that does it. And that's clear to me. But also, he's a very good footballer, as Paul said, right? Just don't mess about, right? When the ball comes to his feet, we're not stressing, are we? In fact, when he loses it, that's when we get stressed. We say, what's happened to him? He must be injured. I mean, like that. Why is he playing?
And it turns out he was.
Yeah, exactly. What's happened to him? We were all like dumbfounded, weren't we? And so yeah, his standards are set so high. But I do think the environment suits him, and he definitely suits us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think any good leader as well, it's, if he's the CEO, you're still defined kind of by your board, your exec committee around you, your other leaders. And I think Arsenal have got a pretty decent blend there. Paul, we're going to move on to another hard-hitting subject, topic that again, I think will demonstrate and illustrate the insight that we're renowned for. Bukayo Saka, also, it turns out, quite good at football. But I really wanted to. There's two sides to my question, and again, I'm going to let you kind of both have a go at it. First of all, there was a really interesting interview after the game, in light of what happened subsequently. So, he spoke after the West Ham game, and he's got like 100 goals and 100 assists this season, and all of that. And he said, "I have my own targets. I know the media like to compare players a lot, but I just try to stay in my own lane and stay focused on what I want to achieve," which clearly the people at TNT Sport did not listen to that interview, because they decided to do a big thing comparing him with Phil Foden for some reason, like that was a necessary thing to do. But I guess the other side of my question here is, Paul, I can't put my finger on it and whether it's just me, and I think this happens more widely. I find that Saka's output washes over me sometimes, somehow. Like, I'm looking at his numbers this season, and I'm still like, wow, I thought he was doing well, but I didn't realise he was doing that well. And I feel like that happens to me a lot with Saka, and I definitely think it happens outside our fan base, that he has a way that I think just washes over people a little bit, which actually causes him to be a little bit underappreciated. Do you get that sense as well?
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. I absolutely get the, Saka's just kind of, he's doing his bit along the way. Before you look, it, and you're halfway through the season, 3/4 of the way through the season, he's racking up numbers that almost nobody else in the league is living with. It's partly because he plays every game,
Yeah.
which is a superpower. And like you talk about the two voices and the anxiousness. I don't really get that. Like,
that's because you do meditation and stuff.
Yeah, I kind of have a natural set point, which is not to worry. But and then I do the meditation, and then I generally don't, like when he's rolling around and holding his ankle and Twitter has just lit up, or like whatever it is over Saka and injuries, I'm like, what are you? He's not injurable. Have you not noticed? He's basically not injurable.
Oh,
And I
no.
know people will be like, "Oh my God, seriously? You think the world cares what I say about Saka, and that's going to determine that God's like, oh yeah, there he is, Paul Cassidy. That's what I was waiting for. I've been waiting the whole time for him to say, and I think I've said it before, and he's still not injured. He's not injurable. Stop worrying. What? I don't get it. So he's there every game. Not only to complement that, he's a phenomenally consistent player. He has his patterns. He has his routines. He's very, very predictable and very, very not stoppable. You can stop him by putting 2 or 3 players right in his face, in his zone, in that he'll recycle it to somebody hopefully in a better position. But that's down to everybody else to be in a better position and to do their movements, and to Arteta to give him what he's looking for in that area, to create options for him. He's unbelievable. I think it's really interesting that he talks about his targets and what he wants to achieve, and that's why he wants to keep taking those penalties.
Yep.
It's not because, like, I think he was crapping his pants against West Ham. Everybody's like, oh, he's so cool and calm, and I was really nervous for him. But he looked like he was crapping his pants, but he wanted to take that penalty. Why did he want to take that penalty? To slay the ghost? Yeah, all that kind of stuff. He also wants the numbers, right? The guy who takes the penalties in the team gets another 6, 8. He wants to be the guy who wouldn't. If I had his talent, I'd want to be the guy. I still wouldn't be the guy, because you have to have that kind of. I said it before about him being kind of. He was an old man when he was 19. His level. He's also a kid when you look at All or Nothing. Like he has both. Like he's like the kid eating breakfast with Smith Rowe, giggling about how much fun it might be to score goals against against Spurs of the weekend or whatever. And then they went and did it. But he's super serious. Like Martinelli is super serious on the pitch all the time, committed, has his goals. Saka wants those penalties because he wants those numbers. He wants to be the man, and very serious about his career. And if Arsenal can fulfill those ambitions, we can grow old together with him. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is him, Odegaard, and to some extent Martinelli getting more space and showing what they could have done all along while we were fretting. Certainly they're doing it a bit more since Dubai.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you look around at the penalty takers in the league, Mo Salah takes them for Liverpool, Haaland takes them for Man City. And I'm sure they've got sizable goal bonuses written into their contracts as well. But yeah, because they want the golden boot, and they're not shy about the fact that they want the golden boot. And Aubameyang took them for us, wasn't a particularly good penalty taker. As much stick as I give Lacazette was 10 times better than Aubameyang from the spot. But Aubameyang came along and was like, you're not going to win the golden boot, are you? I might. So give me the ball, kind of thing. Clive, I'm going to give you a go on Bukayo Saka being good at football, and maybe just to garnish it with a little bit of extra insight, maybe some of the things we've been able to do vis-a-vis what we've just been talking about to free him a little bit more in recent weeks.
Yeah, I think Rio Ferdinand kicked off a debate, didn't he, in the press around whether he's world class or not versus Phil Foden, but very smart from him. But I think what's unique to Saka, and I think what he does, the way he brings the ball in and rolls people, can you think of many other wingers that do that almost invite the contact? Once they get the contact, they know where you are, and then they knock you off balance and run away from you. So most of the wingers that we picture in our minds, they want to unsettle you, unbalance you, then separate away from you, right? So, but he can be like a post-up centre forward, receiving it into his feet, completely square on. He can also take it side on, facing in. He can run over the top in first phase and win the race. So if you're a fullback and you've got someone who can hold you off on a post up, receive it and do 3-step overs so you're frozen to the spot, but also win the race running backwards, if you can do all those things, you've got a problem. So what you then tend to do is think, I need help. And at the weekend against West Ham, he ran the help off the pitch as well, didn't he? He ran both of them off the pitch. They were both gasping, So what they do then is they consolidate. They then hold inside. Holding inside against us in the West Ham game, in the home game, worked. In this game, it didn't work. We just combined that side of the area and then ran through in a much smarter, more intelligent way. So a winger that can do those things, and then also his decision making when to release the ball from the zone he's in to come out. So you bring the ball in, you attract people in, and then you take the ball out and switch point attack to the other side. And so that's why his creative numbers are excellent, because whether he's a pre-assist or the final ball into the box is really, really accurate. And so the thing that stands out to me since the moment he's come into the team, guys, is all those things. We can all see him on the TV. We can all go, yeah, mate, you just do that. Just do that. Why don't you just do that? But he's doing it and has consistently had a high decision-making quality about what he does and choosing the right technique. So a very good all-round player that we can just, again, similar to Odegaard, it's back to the Formula 1 analogy. You can build around him. You can move him position. You can do what you like because he's got all the fundamentals of the game required to do whatever you need in a particular moment. So, yeah, brilliant. Best player in the club. And space next to Thierry Henry is ready for him if he stays at the club. It's true.
Paul, yeah, it definitely is. Paul, you'd like to add to Bukayo Saka is good at football?
I would, and to where Clive was kind of teasing it, he's talking about Odegaard, and we know that relationship's key. And then the next piece of it is Ben White. And there's a whole discussion about the inverting of fullbacks and, why don't we use the more natural inverter as a fullback in Ben White? And I think Arteta has clearly shown reluctance to do that now. I don't think it's a lack of belief that Ben White could do it from the right-hand side. I think it changes all the angles for Ben White. And the foundation for our attack is on the right-hand side. We've seen that's the most stable area. It's kind of where we control the game from, where we control the tempo. And Arteta's talked about giving our Saka the ball in places where he's not going to get injured. So
it's that diagonal pass, right? Like out to in? Yeah, and you see
out
it.
To in.
Yeah.
Feeding Saka the ball right where he has everybody, he's moving away from the marker inside infield. Well, infield is where Martin Odegaard is, and that's where people are saying they want to put Ben White to invert. And Ben White's supposed to be feeding that pass at that angle, and Ben White's supposed to give him an overlap then to pull a defender with him. Like Arteta just doesn't want to take that whole structure, that positioning apart, let alone the fact, that Ben White moving inside would push Saliba to the right to cover, and now Saliba isn't central. I think it's pulling at a few of the things that Arteta thinks is central to how we play, but you could keep it really simple and say Ben White being in a position to feed our Saka, Odegaard being able to rotate a little bit in terms of position but stay really close, and then White having the option to zoom past on the outside, are several elements that Arteta is not going to lose by putting Ben White and Odegaard inside in the same spot, crowding the space Saka wants to run into, pulling opponent players into those areas. We saw White tucking into midfield a couple of times, but I didn't think it was that pronounced or that often. I think it was a necessary thing on the day. Doesn't love it. Worked really well because by that stage their bubble was burst and we were running rampant. Yep. Oh, thank you very much. Yes. Oh, I totally saw that one coming. I'm forever blowing bubbles, Tim. And so I think that's why we basically never see it. He loves that construct of those three players and everything else that flows off it.
Yeah, it's a triangle, isn't it? Right, and you want them at the points of the triangle.
The apex.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, the way that West Ham play as well, they kind of have a triple pivot because they've decided to throw Calvin Phillips into the equation for
Trivet.
reasons that, trivet, for reasons I don't quite understand. But Paul, I'm going to stay with you on this because you kind of brought it up earlier about, fullbacks. Do they invert? Do they not? We didn't have Zinchenko for the West Ham game, and this is maybe the first time we've played without Zinchenko, and I haven't noticed, really. And maybe some of that was because Ben White was coming in a bit. Maybe some of it was other players dropping. But I feel like every time Zinchenko doesn't play, even if we play well without him, I notice he's not there. It does seem to me that I don't know whether this is a tactical tweak per se, but basically it seems like, particularly when Kivior plays at left back, we kind of just don't ask him to do what Zinchenko does, and we have other workarounds. And there was an interesting interview in The Guardian with Kieran Tierney this week with Sid Lowe, and Kieran Tierney talked about how he just didn't feel comfortable doing the Zinchenko thing, and it kind of looks like, because here's my thing with Zinchenko. Here's why I think he's massively over criticised. We ask him to play two positions at the same time. Like, guys, that's really difficult thing to do. And there's a reason that not many people can do it, because it seems like we ask him to be a left back and a central midfielder at the same time. And he does that really, insanely well. So well that it's basically his role and no one else in the league really does it. And it does kind of look like we've fallen on not really asking the other left back to do it. So in a world where Zinchenko isn't available for Saturday, it looks like Tomiyasu apparently will be. So we've kind of got Tomiyasu and Kivior potentially for left back. I mean, which way would you go? Would you keep Kivior going at the moment? Would you bring Tomiyasu in? And I guess just like a little bit more of your kind of impression of what's been happening at left back, and I guess out of necessity learning to play without Zinchenko.
Yeah, you want Zinchenko for 70 minutes, or depending on game state. I think that's the short version of it. Get him off when we got the 5 goals we put him in for. This is one game, I agree with you, where I didn't miss him, and in fact, it would have been. I would have loved to seen the experiment, but you can over egg a pudding, and we already had 3 eggs, basically, in the batter for the mix, and like a
The
fourth.
amorphous blob.
Yeah, no, the morphous polyblob, multi-blob, and like, would you need a Zinchenko, Havertz, Trossard, and Odegaard all do? Like, I'd love to see it. Don't get me wrong. Sign me up. I don't know if I can.
That's some
spare
real
the points.
jazz right there. That's like
Yeah, yeah.
that's like a funkadelic hidden track right there going on.
And so Ben White tucked in a bit, and I think we projected that he must have tucked in a lot, because with that kind of fluid play, we must have been using an inverted fullback a lot. I think he did it a few times. I could be wrong. But what you saw was Odegaard dropping in, especially early on. You saw Trossard dropping deep into midfield, into the spot that, like, when a player isn't there, there's all that space. And when Zinchenko's there, they know to do something to mark him. But when it's suddenly Trossard drops in, Havertz drops in, Odegaard drops in, he ain't getting marked. So he's showing up as the freest of free players in midfield. But you need 3 very capable, flexible players who are all keying off each other, who all spot space and move to it. And I've been very interested to see Havertz and Trossard playing in positions where they could kind of move into those spaces as they open up. They kind of get popped into that space, and that creates a space for somebody else, and they move, and then the other guy gets pulled into the next space. And that's, I think, what was going on against West Ham. After we played from the back and pulled them forward and created some spaces in behind and started to find those spaces, suddenly they got all turned around, didn't know where they were half a step off, and spaces were appearing all over the pitch for those 3 guys to dominate, and everything else was a bit more structure around it. And Zinchenko, I think, would have been standing in some of the same spaces these guys were able to move into. Like, why would you drop in deep and stand beside Zinchenko? And so this was a game, I think, when you play the three Sopranos, I know Ben got that there first by saying the 3-10s, and I never
the
liked
3-10ers is right there.
Yeah, it is the 3-10ers. I'm going with the three Sopranos. When you play them, don't crowd their spaces. You probably only want Rice in that space. I'm probably over-egging this. You probably don't want Ben
Over-egging
White.
Rice. God, where are we going with
Yeah.
all these puns?
Biryani. What's that rice thing with the egg? I don't know. Yeah, but probably a bit of biryani. And so don't crowd his space. But I don't think we'll play the three Sopranos all the time. I'm going to go hard on that one. And I think right now we're in the process of doing down Gabriel Jesus. And just like the other guys, give this guy a bit of space. Gabriel Jesus will make merry. He's a fantastic player, and he is not falling out of my starting 11 by any means. And that's a whole other topic, along with the what kind of striker would you like next? And like, by the way, on the striker topic, yeah, I'd love Haaland. Thank you very much. I didn't know we had unlimited budget and there's a player as good as him. But I'm not sure I'd throw this all away for Højlund or for bloody...
Even an Osimhen.
Yeah, like, yeah, I'd love him in my squad, but you're going to a more fixed structure. If you like this, you can't have that, is basically how I feel about it. Have an option, got all the money to do it. Do I want one of those guys on the bench? Sure. But we don't have unlimited money. There are very, very few strikers where I say, well, I'd give up a big chunk of what we saw at the weekend to play that guy most games. And if you spend a shitload of money, you're changing how you play because that guy is supposed to start most of the time. So,
yeah, and I think that probably underscores the Ivan Toney discussion as well. So, Clive, weirdly enough, we were talking about left backs there, and we got onto Haaland and Ivan Toney. We're taking this amorphous blob thing too far. It's all getting a little bit psychedelic. Clive, a little chaser before I want to talk about Fabio Vieira a bit. But who are you starting at left back on Saturday? Assuming everyone's fit.
So I'd probably keep the team the same, but I'd probably look to introduce Tomiyasu back into the group slowly but surely. I just think he's just a bit more experienced, a bit more active in more areas, a bit more confident in his distributing, and his one-on-one defending is excellent. And for many, I just think he's a wonderful player. And the only thing that stops him from being really wonderful is that his cars blow up every now and again, right? So, and that's a problem. But it doesn't seem to be a problem for the club because he's about to sign a new contract. So wherever it is, they feel they can manage it. So it's going to be a situation where he'll be managed with us going forward. So, yeah, I would keep it very, very similar, and I would end the side slightly differently. I think Smith Rowe's a bit unlucky to miss an on-ball game like West Ham, but maybe we wouldn't have seen the Trossard Havertz thing, so which I think is very sustainable at a very high level. And it wasn't. Go ahead, mate. Sorry.
No.
Sorry. It wasn't the fact that they passed each other all day, because they didn't, but their interchangeability was wonderful. And so yeah, I look at it that way. But Smith Rowe missed out a chance to get on the ball really and really have an impact, and I feel for him really. But that's a problem he has about being robust at the critical moments. Nelson had that for a long time, didn't he? Every time he got a bit of a run, bang, something would go. So yeah, it's a challenge. Health is just a challenge for footballers. But yeah, I'd keep it that way, Tim. I wouldn't mess about too much. Just want to get the game done, because Champions League is the first knockout tie I've had for 6-7 years, and it brings a level of emotional drain, right? So and so the game that we got, without looking ahead too far, Champions League game is what it is, a separate entity in itself. Hopefully it goes well. But Newcastle, mate, Saturday night, 8 o'clock kickoff, North London, plenty of pre-drink time. Gee whiz, that could be that could be a special evening, right? So and we owe them one. So that's two big emotional games in home games. So just get this one done. We said last week, didn't we? Let's keep it ourselves under the radar. Go to West Ham, just win 1-0. What do we do? Go and win 6-0. So everyone's talking about us and everything that we do. But I'll be happy with a 1-0. I wouldn't, but I'll be happy with a 1-0. Just get the win and save our emotional energy for the two massive games next week.
And yeah, you referenced Smith Rowe there. I wanted to talk a little bit about that because there are reports that Fabio Vieira is very close to coming back, and clearly for him going for a tie against FC Porto, a little bit of extra motivation for him there. I'm sure he'd love to be in the squad at least for that game. We're talking a lot about amorphous blobs and players that do this and that. I mean, a lot of the stuff I read about Fabio Vieira at Porto was that this is a guy that plays three different positions in one game, where Porto would have him left central midfield, left back, false nine, all in the space of a game. And maybe that's cost him a little. Maybe he, to this point, has fallen into that Maitland-Niles vortex where sometimes you can be too versatile and you can't nail down a place. But if we're talking about Arsenal becoming a little bit more fluid, however long that lasts, I guess, do you see Fabio Vieira as a good player to come into that that kind of framework, and maybe what that might mean for Smith Rowe, who kind of got a sniff row, as it were, and turned his ankle at the wrong time, and what I guess for Smith Rowe, both Trossard playing well and Vieira coming back potentially does.
Yeah, every minute counts. That's why I felt sorry for Smith Rowe. Every minute counts. Because what you're doing now is and how you're training and how you're reacting and behaving is driving the recruitment and selling strategy for the summer. And so, if Smith Rowe was to explode, then maybe it sounds crazy now when Trossard basically had man of the match per game. We would look at Trossard and say, well, actually, maybe we move him on. If Vieira does really, really well, then we have a decision to make. And at this moment in time, Trossard's come into his team for the last year and he's delivered. So he has delivered. He's stayed healthy. He's delivered assists. He's delivered goals. He's delivered pattern of play. And he works hard off the ball. So he's doing his job, right? Give me a new contract, son. Excuse me, Smith Rowe and Vieira, they're memories at the moment. They're memories. I think they've both got huge potential, but they're memories. Vieira, he hasn't had the track record Smith Rowe's had, but his football potential is significantly high. And his level is really, really high. If we can get him there, we wait. Don't forget what this guy can do. I mean, he could literally be, and I've seen it with my own eyes, in that Fulham game when he came on, he was literally the best player on the pitch by a mile. And he just took over the game. So that's in there. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's in there. So how can we get that out of him on a consistent basis? And I'm not ready to turn away from that because that level was really, really high. And so we got to discover what's in Fabio Vieira. It may take a loan. It may take something to happen, but something's got to get him on that pitch so he can find out his true potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of potential, I want to foreground this before talking maybe a little bit about set piece threat, and particularly against Burnley. But Paul, just before we started recording, reports come out from Ed Aarons in The Guardian about Norwich being interested in appointing our very own Carlos Cuesta as manager at the end of the season. And this is a guy we haven't talked about a lot, because I think he kind of came in as, he was like the player development coach, right? He was the one who sat down one-on-one with players, and we saw him doing that in the All or Nothing documentary. That quite amusing scene where he sits down with Lacazette and shows him Benzema. How Benzema plays centre forward, which I know it wasn't pointed, but almost seemed very pointed. It's like showing me Odegaard. It's like, I can't do that. Come on. But he obviously had, and he came in very young. I remember when he was appointed under Arteta, I know I asked questions and I was like, this guy's 26 and we've got a young manager. Do we want like 26-year-old staff with Arteta? Do we not want, someone who's been around the block a bit more, I guess a bit like Steve Round. Steve Round left during the summer. That all went very quiet. There was nothing was announced about his replacement, but Carlos Cuesta, to me, has looked visibly more prominent. I'm certainly seeing him on the pitch at full time. When the lap of honour goes on and all of that, like, it looks kind of like he's been given a bit of Steve Round's role. But I guess I wonder what you think of the fact that at Norwich, our former loans manager is the director of football. He wants to take, by the looks of it, one of our coaches who's 30, I think, to manage Norwich. And it feels a bit like how we ended up with a lot of guys from Brentford and how a lot of guys from Brighton are now in the kind of, in the top six, shall we say. Like, looks like Dan Ashworth might go to Manchester United, and he'd been at Brighton. Like, do you think this is beginning to look like people are looking at Arsenal now and saying, Arsenal are a smart club, they must have some smart guys there? And, I guess a little bit about, because we don't really know what Carlos Cuesta does, but our image, I guess, and what this might say about it.
Yeah, he seems like a lovely, lovely man. I remember watching the All or Nothing and thinking, I'd love to have somebody like that I could go and talk to. And just, it seemed to be his job to make people feel better about themselves and, just look at them in a certain way. I was like very intrigued by what he actually did. It can't be that all the time, can it? But it was certainly a job. I looked him up on Wikipedia. There's like 2 lines in there. I'm like, that's not going to be much help to me. I remember hearing along the way that he was an actual coach, and I'm like, oh, okay. He doesn't just sit in with these guys, whatever. He's a very
man.
promising, yeah. So apparently he's an actually good, well-regarded coach within the system. Seems to be the vibe I pick up. But to your bigger point of, might actually people looking at Arsenal as a high-functioning club and thinking, well, if I peel off one of those pieces, he'll have that superpower. Now, if they're smart, they'll think, well, look, that's not how it works. This guy has talent and he's good, and he's come from a high functioning system, so he knows what high functioning is like, and he knows what when he sees low functioning, he'll know that is not what we're looking for. And it's also a message to your people. Like it's a bit like buying an English player for the fans, right? He's a good player and he's English, and it gets the fans excited. It's like buying the sporting director from Brighton and bringing him to your club. You got the guy, you got his know-how. It's also a message to your fans, to your organization, that you're going places, that you have ambition, that you want to be a lot better than you are today. And so and that comes into the price. And when you're selling players, we may not get to sell Carlos Cuesta, but when you're selling players, the same thing's happening, right? They come from a functioning system that's doing well. There's a halo effect for the player. And it's a signal to your, like, you'll pay a little extra to get the fans excited during the summer for a player versus a player where they're all saying, oh, who's this? Who's this guy? What'd you get him for? He's crap. Just, the little unfortunate to mention it, but the Ramsdale effect of, actually, it turns out the player was very good, but the fans hated the idea. We had enough going on in the summer. We had 5 other players to excite and confuse us. So it wasn't actually that big a deal. But if that had been one of 2 players we signed that summer to get the fans excited, they'd have been thrown Edu off a cliff, right? Because of where he came from. And like the other way around, it works too. Bringing in a player for an exciting team, you never know enough about the player. So there's a lot of projection onto it. I think it'll be a sign to any club that you're looking to be a high functioning team. And it's also, look, we got Arteta from City. Okay, we already had a relationship with the guy. We probably all rated him to some degree. But a huge amount of his halo effect was the fact that he was side by side with Pep Guardiola. Now, he was the hand, to use a Game of Thrones term. He was the hand of the king. He wasn't just a coach. He was the coach. And there were lots of good stories in the media and Pep had been hyping him along the way. But a similar family of coming from a high functioning organization. I always joked about him leaving with spending the last 2 weeks in the photocopier room before he left Man City. And it's why Arteta, I've pivoted again, sorry. It's why he wasn't just a coach and they made him a manager very quickly. It was clear in his intent and probably in their original thinking that they didn't just want a coach. They wanted a guy who had standards for every aspect of our football club from a footballing perspective. And that's what you look for with Carlos Cuesta. He'll come in. He won't just come in to do a bit of coaching or a bit of managing. He will come in with ideas for the club and how everything around the club should work relating to the football side of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And Norwich, I think, are just in a bit of a spiral at the moment. And, they've got David Wagner, and that's not going that well. And it looks like what they're trying to do is break that cycle. And I think there's a couple of things going on. You look at Arsenal, a club that broke the cycle. How did they break the cycle? There's something, I think, a little bit fashionable in terms of who are the two young coaches in Europe who are really making waves at the moment. Arteta, Xabi Alonso. So just get a young Spanish guy, basically. Doesn't matter who. Just a young Spaniard, and that will sort all your problems out. No, sorry, that's being mean to Carlos Cuesta. But Clive, maybe to wrap up here, particularly as we come into a game against Burnley, where we took Brentford's set piece guy, right? And I remember thinking, that sounds like a good idea. Brentford are really good at set pieces. I want their set piece guy. And that's kind of worked pretty well. And we're playing a team who haven't been very good at defending set pieces. And we exposed them there in the home game. I mean, the phrase you used a lot during the darker years was employer of choice. And I wonder what you think of this whole thing about like Carlos Cuesta might get like a good profile championship job for a team that's got aspirations to come back into the Premier League. And all right, on one hand, when the eyes are on you, your staff might get picked off by these jobs. But on the other hand, what a sell that is to other young coaches to say, we got Carlos Cuesta, and within 3 years he was managing a championship club. Like, if you like, we can use that in order to attract people as well. So yeah, I guess like using the Cuesta discussion just as an anchor for Arsenal perhaps having that halo effect, as Paul said.
Yeah, when Arsenal got Carlos Cuesta, he was well renowned at that time, particularly for what he's done for his age and how well qualified he was. And so his original title was like individual development coach. And so it's the sort of coaching that I used to do, basically, when I used to do it. I'm much better with one-on-ones, talking to people about their game, intricacies of their game, and other people like Albert, who's maybe more of a session coach. You have guys that can control the whole group. They just do it easy. I could never do that. So yeah, it's he is well renowned. And when Steve Round went, it was no surprise to me that he wasn't replaced per se, and he was replaced in-house by the current group. Because how you keep talented people is by increasing their roles and responsibilities.
And we're seeing that at executive level, right?
Took the words out of my mouth, mate. Look what we've done to Edu. Look what we've done to Mikel Arteta. As soon as we saw his ways of working, bang, you're the manager. Look what we've done to Edu. Look what we've done to people within the club. We've given them extra roles or different roles and layered them appropriately. So I think we go. There's going to be a time when talented people are going to leave because they feel they've hit the ceiling. And so right now we have to be looking at succession planning, regardless. And I'm sure we are. Because when you have good, talented people that are successful, you have to think someone may tap on the shoulder at some point. And you have to be fair to their ambition, that they may need to grow elsewhere, and they can always come back. And so it's just something we have to think about. We do have to think about it, and because I listened to a Liverpool podcast this week because I'm really trying to get perspective on our club from other people, and one thing they said was, Arsenal looked at City. They said Arsenal are probably the best coach team in the league, but haven't quite got the players yet. So people trust the Haalands, the Fodens, the De Bruynes, the Salah, the Trent, because they've got the medals, they've got European Cup medals in their pockets. They don't trust our players yet, so we love them. We've been talking about them, but the words came from them. We are the best coached, and I think that's true. I think we look the best coach. We look the most interesting tactically. Our players have still got it to prove because they're quite young, and that's the next phase for this club.
That's a really good note, I think, on which to end maybe this episode of the podcast. And I know we have to lose Paul anyway. So thanks very much for joining us. Paul, who you can follow on Twitter at @PosnaninMyPants. Thank you very much. And Clive, who you can follow on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Thank you very much, Clive.
Thank you very much, Steve.
And we will have an instant reaction on Saturday evening, UK time that is, straight after the Burnley game, which will also be live streamed as well. If you want to be a patron or you're already a patron, you're interested in that. Otherwise, we'll be back with another episode looking back at our 10-0 win over Burnley on Monday, which we will win with 10 set pieces because Nicolas Jova is that good, and he is going to be appointed the new coach of Real Madrid next week. So once all that happens, we will cover it all, and we'll speak to you after Burnley 0, Arsenal 10.